something his father.
Oh, they did a special issue as well.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Ordered this on
I bought it
Amazon
for a friend.
for you.
Oh my! Are you kidding?
And
He ordered his father's book on Amazon?
we have to buy it.
Oh my
We
God.
only get a few. And unfortunately, he didn't
My
realize that
very
it was
old-
dedicated to
That's
My
all right.
little, my very young
Such an honor to
husband
receive that.
band.
Okay.
Oh my
It's a
goodness.
very childish hobby.
This is,
Oh,
I am
yes,
so,
yes.
so grateful. Thank you very much.
Now, which other two books did you say you had
It was writings, two
Yes.
thin books on
on
different essays. Different
Oh.
essays.
I know.
Yeah.
Which essays?
I have to remember
I
what
got-
the
I
essays
bought
are.
this. I had to go and buy
And
this.
if I may suggest reading
Oh, you got
this
it.
book,
Where did you get it?
From the European bookshop.
Where's
this
that?
is
In,
an amazing,
Warwick
amazing
Street.
book.
Christopher.
When did you get it? Today?
Well, no, he ordered it.
The Kaminsky
I had to
Cube.
go
What's
and
it about?
buy it.
It's about a family
Oh, where's
during
that?
the
This thing.
Nazi era. The mother
lovely.
is Jewish and the father is a kind of priest.
Mm.
And the children, the story is told from the point of view of the youngest child.
Really?
No,
And it's an amazing,
It's
not mine. It's not mine.
Put it on the
That
cube.
made me laugh.
Yeah, and I
this is
checked today on
complete
Amazon,
Yeah.
they have it at 8
And I just didn't even find the front cover.
I think one can order it at 8 pounds.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so where did everyone? Shall we? Wait.
There were meant to be about, I think Susan Candell said there were about 17 people or so, under 20.
But maybe they knew that was happening.
Yeah,
They
put
thought
them
they
on.
don't need to go and
It put me off.
They put you off what?
Yes, I
Did
think
it?
it's inhibited, yes. I do.
Yeah.
I don't like, my idea of a book is because I chair a book group.
Yeah.
That's outside. It's, fairly formal, but you talk. And you talk freely without being publicised to the world.
Well, yeah.
You'll see how it goes.
Did George go back, Sylvia?
Pardon?
George has gone back.
No, he's in New York at the moment. He's going to, I think, Texas or somewhere, and then coming back on the 14th. Then he'll stay 2 weeks,
Oh, nice.
which is a gift.
And you see how my writing is
Rosie said she was coming. That's very nice.
Okay.
when we talked about
Susan?
and,
Last night Rosie said she was coming.
Yeah, I'm sure she will. Yeah. Right.
You read those?
No, I haven't heard of
Love them.
Okay. Should we begin, or should we wait 2 minutes?
Wait 2 minutes.
Who else?
Some people coming.
Rosie's definitely coming.
All right. But I read it on the iPad,
So,
and in the iPad it's all centered,
I've got so many
so
books
it's justified here on both
coming out
sides.
of my ears.
That way on purpose. So everybody's here, right?
Okay.
In other words, it's not justified right or left, centered, blocked.
Oh,
way
I
this-
see.
yeah.
The Adriatic Free Library, Avenue of Two Rivers, runs.
Well, I don't know. I
New
think it's
Jersey.
particular to this book. Hello. How are you?
so this is the original.
No, this is
Oh, no, I saying
Because this is our first session together, and it's really it's an experiment. So we'll see how it goes, how the format goes, and what we want to do. Just to reiterate, the premise for this book club is we had a bit of a committee before we met with speaking about the ideas and how it might work and how it might not and so on. I'll say very open to comment, not just within the discussion, but after the discussion about format and how it is that we go through it and so on and so forth. Even seating, and this was my idea. I don't know if it would work or not work. Now I kind of feel very removed from everybody. Everyone doesn't want to be in front of the camera, right? I knew who knew, And I tend to always relate it back to concepts and ideas that I know from my my time in Torah or studying Torah, and it only enriches because there's another element, another point, and another idea that people in the world see about reality. And to me, Torah is a framework of reality. And so whenever I see anything that people, I feel there's really nothing out there that doesn't have its place somewhere in Torah. I was just reading, I don't know if you've heard of the Tablet magazines. So one of the writers, forget the name right now, one of the writers is doing the run of the Daf Yomi. So he's learning a daily page in the Gemara, both sides of the page. And he's writing on the 7 pages basically that he's reading in the, so right now where the world is at with the Daf Yomi is in Masechet Yebamot, which deals with, in its premise, the entire question of when a man marries a woman and that man dies without children. Appropriately, what's supposed to happen is if that man has a brother, the brother's supposed to marry this woman or say that he doesn't wish to marry him. So that's the whole tractate, deals with Yemama. But the tractate ends up dealing with the entirety, practically, of human sexuality. And what this man points out in his article is the timeline's completely secular within the discussion. So the premise of the book, a very long introduction for my premise, which isn't the premise of the book club is to read secular books, not Jewish books. Right? We're not interested necessarily in reading Jewish books. Secular books, and seeing them from a framework of Torah. And that would be my contribution to the discussion. But the discussion essentially is about the elements of life that are expressed in the art of literature and what a Torah perspective might be. So we're going to look at fiction and nonfiction. You may opt in or out given the month. So you may not be interested in reading about Richard Dawkins and the theory of evolution and the mechanisms. You'd be more interested in the short stories that are coming afterwards. And so you opt out of next month and you come back in the month after that. So being part of the club doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to be at every single reading and so on. It's open for the community. Obviously, we've got people able to log on remotely, so if they want to read the book but not necessarily come to the discussion, but eavesdrop on the discussion, they can do that in the comfort of their own home, on their iPad, whatever it is, in any country that the timing works for them. So that's what we're going to try to do. It's all an experiment. I hope that works well. I hope the discussion works well. So what I've done is I've prepared a bit of Torah context for it, but we'll put it in as it comes if it comes, and we'll see how the discussion goes. And I'll try to moderate. That said, suggestions, for books. I've only chosen the first 3, which may be a little bit, manipulative. The third one is a book of short stories by Mark Helprin, who's actually a friend of mine, but one of my favorite authors in the world. I think he's really, really great in terms of this. So that's the third. But after that, we're open. We're open. Okay, so questions about that, or should we get into the discussion? Any comments on that? Clarity?
Well, one book I was going to suggest, and I mentioned to you, was a Julian Barnes book, because I just think it's beautifully written, with a sense of an ending. It's not a new one. I don't know if anyone's read it.
No.
Julian Barnes.
Right, I'm just coming a little closer. I feel like I'm really ahead of that. Yeah. All right, so let's. So Holden Caulfield. Yeah. The first thing do you relate to this kid? Or do you think he's just, crazy, you want to smack him? What?
He's a very typical, I'd put him out 16-year-old, very sad little boy.
Okay. But typical?
I think so.
Well, typical of that time, I think.
I think he's a bit of a gawky teenager.
So, but the ending, you know where he's at the end?
He's at a psychiatrist.
He's at the psychologist. Yeah, I thought, I could have missed it, but I thought that he was actually being held in ward. By the end. It's a little bit beyond.
Yes, because he said when I get out of
clinic. Yeah, he says when I get out of here.
I'm going to whatever.
Yeah.
But until you get to that stage, you can almost feel that he's talking to you.
So that's the question, do you relate to this kid? Or do you think that he's just too typical teenager?
I think he is. He doesn't really know where he's going.
Okay.
That was my perspective.
When did you read it? I mean, how old were you?
Oh no, I've just reread it.
You just reread it.
I read it a few years ago. I don't recall reading it as a child.
Right.
I
I
read it
Yeah.
and I've just reread it because it,
I found him irritating.
Why?
I don't know, maybe because there's a big difference to having read it when I was a kid and reading it now. And I just didn't have the patience for him. All this jumping around and how little empathy he had with a lot of people until he got to his sister. It was all about him, and he had no patience for anything or anyone else if it didn't relate to him.
It's a really important point. You know, I mean, that's probably very much what we might find in youth. You know, there's not a tremendous amount in general of openness and empathy to what's necessarily in their world. But did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say perhaps perhaps we're doing him an injustice because he's a profoundly moral person.
Yes.
If anything,
Yes.
he's the most moral person in literature
Yeah.
which has totally unfitted him for the world he finds himself in, because he's surrounded by phonies, by people who have what, from some point of view, are stupid aspirations, worthless aspirations, who lives and their efforts and their activities on things which are pointless and valueless and stupid and have no human value at all. I mean, I'm getting carried away here.
No, it resonated very much with me when I was reading it. You know, he uses this concept of phonies constantly. And I the nice thing about reading on the iPad is you can.
Right.
So I searched how many times he says, "If you want to know," if you want to know the truth, and every chapter at least 5 times. He's saying, "Well, if you want to know the truth," and so truth is really important to Holden Caulfield, really important. And the thing that was interesting to me, there's 2 serious deaths that are very close to this. To him,
brother.
right? His brother dies,
And the boy.
and the thing that he remembers and loves is his baseball mitt that has poetry written all over his mitt, and that he's very. That's that. But then there's this other death.
The boy in school.
The boy in
So we only find out about that later on from the old luggage.
Yeah.
Right? He hates anybody that has old luggage. But you're reading it and almost like, oh my gosh. He's brushing his teeth, and all of a sudden this kid that is really a good kid, and he says he was like the most down-to-earth normal kid. So it's not just a death. It's that he felt, was the down-to-earth, kind, engaging kid. That kid gets pushed out of the thing. Why? Who remembers why he gets pushed out of the window?
Because he wouldn't apologise.
He wouldn't
He wouldn't take back.
He wouldn't take back what he said. Right, so this is in Holden Caulfield's world. You stand up for what This is the one kid that stood up for what it was that he said, and he wouldn't take it back. He died because of it.
And everyone rejects him after he dies, except for this one schoolmaster.
The schoolmaster.
who's willing to be him.
Right.
And he died wearing the kid Holden's sweater, didn't
Sweater,
he?
Right.
yes.
Which he remembers.
You read that all of a sudden. To me, this character, which seems like a very superficial, annoying character, opens up the depth of humanity that this 16-year-old child has had to face. Because let's be honest, death is as real as it gets. It's as real as it gets. We're all online. It's the most certain reality. And there's no real getting around that. So when we experience it in our lives, it's something that is a reality that hits us powerfully. So I always felt, as I was reading, I'm going to be very honest here. I didn't read this as a teenager. I read this for the book club. I read this for the book club. But I know Salinger, and Barbara, she's a fan of Salinger. That's what sparked it, in my mind. I said, you know what? This may be. thinking about the way that death is presented in this book for this child, in this person, in his experience, it's very serious, it's very, very profound, because it is the one thing in life that you can't be phony about. You can put dressing on almost anything else. You can't really put dressing on that. The interesting thing that you were saying, who was saying that? Yeah, I think you were saying, Susan, that he's not relating. I think also you were saying that he's not. Sandro, you were saying that he's only thinking about his own.
He's not relating to anybody else until he came to his sister.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then suddenly it wasn't about him; it was about her.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very sensitive towards her.
Yeah. Well, why?
I don't think that's really fair, because at the very beginning he said, "I'm going to tell you everything that happened to me in that year around Christmas and what happened." And then he's telling his story. And it was so about him. But what I liked about it, and you found irritating, was that he's such a tremendous mixture.
Yeah.
He's tormented, he's funny, he's a bit sort of, he tells these preposterous lies.
Yes.
He gets away with all kinds of things, and there's all the boasting about the girls and losing his virginity and all that, which is laughable.
Right.
And yet he's got this really serious thing going on underneath. And he hints at some very dark things, like he doesn't really get on with his parents. I mean, his mother does not feature in this much, except for a few lines. Yeah. And for a boy as troubled as this, I find that really quite worrying in a way.
You're not surprised that he's where he is by the end, and that this is the way that they're treating him. You wonder. I wondered whether he really belonged there. Did you?
Well, you see, this was another thing. I mean, he came from this very wealthy family. They have a beautiful apartment and a maid, and he's got enough money to go in taxi cabs everywhere he wants all around Manhattan. Most boys don't do that. They're on the bus, they're on the subway, aren't they? And I just found it such a mixture. And for that reason, I find it really timeless. It doesn't matter if it's written in 45 or whether it's written now, because I think it applies to young people now.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to ask, is this a classic? Is it timeless?
It's timeless.
It's timeless.
It is timeless.
I'm not sure that everybody agrees. Would probably be on that end of the thing, but I'm not sure that everybody does, because we wonder. Somebody said, in 1945, maybe that's how kids were. Are kids still like that today? Is this still an issue today? No.
Maybe it wouldn't be expressed in quite those words.
Right.
When you read the book, you can begin to think initially. I read it a long time ago. I do, but I've forgotten it. To tell the truth. When I
To tell you the
recently read it again. But when you start reading it, it seems, well, this is just another disgruntled, purposeless, wandering teenager, and I don't know how much of this I can take. And it's, in a short while, you see there's something much deeper, much deeper behind it, and that really he's the one who's purposeful and can see things properly. It's just that the world is so disappointing in terms of the people around him, and his schoolmates, and the people he encounters.
Because he does two brothers. He loves J.B. too. He admires him, and and it's
But D.B. prostituted himself by going off to
Oh,
Holden
yes.
to write
The
film
movie.
scripts. Yes.
But what you say about Phoebe, his sister? Why do you think it's her? Is it just because it's his sister?
I think because it's his sister, his younger sister, so he can actually care about somebody.
Because he doesn't believe she's become a phony yet.
He's too young.
He likes
to be a
children.
Yeah.
Too young to be a
Well,
Well, that's what he wants to be, isn't it? The catcher in the rye is to stop the children running off being lemmings.
Yeah.
That's his purpose.
I think all of his interactions with kids were actually quite at the end in the museum. He loved
he took the
Well,
little
he's
two
playful
kids.
with
yeah,
them.
yeah. And he would always say that he really loved things that they would say and do, and also when he was in the park with the girl he saw with the skates and things, he relates to them.
But isn't that
Better.
partly because he can't relate to boys of his own age?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't get on with his schoolmates who are combing their hair and doing all these things that he's not interested in. But he's much better with people of a different age group and a younger age group, maybe.
They're all
But
phonies.
Yeah.
You know, he said, and the more expensive the school is, the more
Yeah. But he also loved the two nuns, didn't he?
he loved the two. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, and he
they
keeps
were-
thinking about those two.
Yes.
They're very engaged in basic life and humanity.
And innocent.
Yeah, and innocent. It speaks to him.
Do we know if it's autobiographical in any way?
With Salinger, you mean?
Yeah.
I think he had some of these issues personally. I don't know.
But it's the only book he ever wrote. isn't
Yeah.
it?
No, he wrote
He-
Franny and Missouri, which is one of my
Oh.
favourites, and For Elsme the Love and Squabbing, which
He's written.
are short stories.
There's a
which
few he's
I love.
written.
He's written. But he, I mean, I don't know that we want to get into the discussion necessarily himself, which is valuable, but you know, he had some interesting complexes. I wonder. But you know, it's interesting because he does tell these lies, but he always says that he knows that he's telling the lies and gets a kick out of it, and he will only tell lies to people that love the lies. Because what happens in himself, you know, he hates phoniness so much, and it'll kill it for you if he doesn't have integrity in terms of his own phoniness. So I thought this was great. I told you I go around and probably wouldn't believe me. I almost was once in a movie short. Remember that? But I changed my mind at the last minute. I figured that anybody that hates the movies as much as I do, I'd be a phony if I let them stick me in a movie short. You know, so
Yes.
you yes, Holden. At least you were consistent with what you're doing. So he loves kids because he thinks that they don't know how to lie yet. You know, and if they do, it's so innocent that, they just see reality almost as it is. You know, there's all these wonderful things. I tend to, relate to what you're saying. I read Holden Caulfield, and I very, very much related to him. And he doesn't like words. Like, I put over here this great point that he makes about, this word grand. He hates that word.
Phony word.
Yeah, it's a phony word.
Yes.
People use it all the time. Grand, there's a word I really hate. It's a phony. I could puke every time I hear it.
Yeah.
He hates movies.
He hates the movies for that
Movies,
reason.
yeah.
But, reading it, doesn't it make us wonder what we put up with? Or do we look at him and say, just grow up and put up? You know what I'm saying? In other words, does it make us wonder how much are we putting up with that's phony? Is there... I mean, obviously there's a limit to his capacity to engage. He has a really hard time having any relationships beyond his younger sister. But, is he the noble one? Because, he can't. Or is there a problem in that he holds too high and pristine of a standard, or is it somewhere in the middle?
Well, in the dichotomy that was put to him, of course, he's the noble person who dies for his ideal, instead of being the person who can live humbly with the imperfections, and he's unable to live humbly with the imperfections. So he's outwardly very, very aggressive, not really sure of his accusations.
Noble in the most concrete sense.
Yes.
Can't mix.
But I think you could remember that that's only just one part of him.
Mhm.
There's all these other parts, the humour. I mean, he's so funny.
Yeah.
He comes out with some really, really funny things. And the lies, again, it's a sort of a game he's playing. Like when he meets the mother of one of the boys at school, when he's run away, and he's telling her all sorts of things and lies about the boy and everything. And then he doesn't stop there. He goes on, he said, I'm having a little operation. I just had a little tumour, just a little brain tumour. And he's bad.
Yeah, because she's buying it.
Yeah.
He's
And
loving all that.
he did say after he said it, he regrets. Like,
Yeah.
and how he regrets it, so he wanted to go back and maybe change.
He couldn't help it. He couldn't help it. But that, he does have a fantastic sense of humor. And reading through it, I feel that in order to be able to have a sense of humor, you need to be able to see the incongruity of reality of life. I mean, you need to just be able to see where things just don't fit together, because that's really where humor comes from. I mean, you know, the ability to be able to see that things are ironic, that things don't match, that things don't fit in a particular place, and he has this keen eye. So yeah, he's laughing throughout the entire thing, but he constantly is depressed, isn't he?
Mm.
I mean, he really is plagued with, and he's aware of his own depression, and he's aware of what brings him depression, the things that bring him depression. So why is that happening to him? I mean, you know, he's living in a world, and where is he? I mean, I think it's important to talk about the setting, isn't it? What's the setting of the story? Where is this all taking place?
Oh, it's smart. Audience public school.
New York
No,
City.
New York.
It's happening in New York City.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the city. I mean, you know, I kept feeling reading it. You know, I just want him to get home. Did anyone feel that, or was it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because he just keeps going. Oh, another? I mean, you're not going home after the hotel. You're still.
Yeah.
But he won't.
He won't go home. He doesn't fit in at home. He just seems
And he
to be
doesn't like
such
his
an
parents.
unloved
Yeah.
child.
But he's also very frightened of what his
He's
father's
scared
going to
of what
say.
they're gonna say.
And he's
He's like
flunked
that.
out of another school.
Well, he also said something about the fact that he couldn't do it to his mother because she'd be so upset already because of the death of their brother.
That was
So
when he
that
was
suggests
considering
maybe it wasn't that he wasn't loved, but that's how he felt, like he couldn't disappoint them.
Yeah. But the reality is he can't land.
But while he's going, he's going all these places. I thought really one of the saddest things when he gets out his address book, desperately trying to phone people, and he's got 3 names in the address book, and he says, "I just put down," but he doesn't have more than 3 friends or more than 1 friend, and I found that really sad. And
He's a wanderer.
Doesn't fit.
I find it that when you get off to the teacher, this, you know, the man with the older wife, who he reckons, you know, was a perv. Well, I don't know, whether he patted his head.
Right. And that was the guy that he really, I mean, that was the one guy that he actually admired.
He has
you know,
a vivid imagination.
Yeah, very.
Oh,
do you mean you think?
but so you don't think there was anything in there?
Maybe there was. You don't know.
I
Maybe
don't
there.
know.
No, I'm saying maybe there was.
Well, why was he sitting in the dark patting his head in the middle of the night?
Maybe he felt
Well,
sorry
he
for this
felt
young
Well,
child.
you don't know that. Remember,
But
remember,
because
this
he-
whole story is happening from Holden's point of view,
Yeah.
right? And all it says is that he fell asleep, and the next thing that he knows is he felt the person patting his head. It wasn't like he was sitting there, and he just completely, freaks out about the entire thing. You don't know, but remember, the only reason that I maybe thought that there was some kind of foul play going on is because he keeps saying the entire time how much he's drinking.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
He's
right.
drinking,
Yeah.
he's drinking, and then the wife, and people say their coffee's ready, and it's never ready, and that business.
But still, just before this episode, I do think that what this teacher says to him is, he empathizes very, very much with him, and he's very, very sensitive to what he's going through. So, yeah, I agree with you.
And he lets him come on. That's the funny thing, because he's conflicted, isn't he? Afterwards, maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe he was.
He wasn't sure,
Yeah.
but he
But
thought it was odd.
Yes.
But that's
he
why I'm
be
saying he
seen-
has such a vivid imagination that he stopped. He maybe separate the truth
I
from the
think
untruth.
I actually think he was very much, he could see reality quite well. And that if he felt there was something not quite right, there must have been something that wasn't quite right.
But
He
He's
couldn't
quite
pinpoint
prone
it.
to getting
It's-
angry.
yeah.
You know, I mean, I find anger related to his depression because of the deaths within the family, whatever you want to say, and that he wasn't really nurtured at the time that it happened.
And if he
And
comes
there was
from
a lot of separation then between, the parents were looking after themselves and forgetting their children.
What about the situation with the prostitute?
Isn't that a classic tale of
Well,
a teenager?
I don't know. I'm not sure that it's a classic tale of a teenager. I mean, I'm not a teenager anymore, but,
Well, he was desperately trying to be grown up.
But what happens in that room? If we can go back to that for a minute, It's okay. He's going to try and get...
It's a child.
What does he want to do?
Talk.
He wants to talk to her.
Yes.
he wants to talk. And this happens, parenthetically, it happens a few times in the book. He wants to have intelligent conversation. And he can't even
in
have
the bar.
and he can't even have intelligent conversation with intellectuals. Right? He says unless they're manipulating the conversation, they won't talk to you. Right? Unless they're controlling the conversation, they won't, And all he wants to do is talk with this girl. So he's paying to talk to a girl, and he can't, and what ends up happening to him as a result of it? I mean, to me, that was it was the most vulnerable, sensitive, sad part of the story of his discussion, because it's kind of like after that happens, this would be the way I was reading, but it was all downhill from there, in the sense that it was downhill. I mean, from that point, it's there where he says outright, I wanted to commit suicide. Right? So he's sitting there, he's trying to go to sleep, he wants to commit suicide. Because he can't even pay for a conversation with somebody, and be able to engage. And to him, the way that I saw it is that he feels like he cannot connect to the world that he's in. And to me, seeing this entire thing set in New York City, you almost don't have a city in the world that is more diverse and the only place you could be running that long is New York City. I mean, everything else closed. This city is open up. Everything is opened. You have every option in this city. It's so chaotic and so complex. Yeah, it does not serve to rehabilitate him, and he's trying to find some level of rehabilitation, and he can't in any setting. And at this point, where he's alone in a room with this woman, obviously it wasn't the place to find it. That maybe was a 16-year-old problem. But the way I know every other kid, teenager, I don't think they would have had that kind of difficulty that the prostitute's not talking to him. Okay, you either do go through with it, you don't go through with it, whatever the case is. But the bottom line is, you don't want to jump out a window because she wouldn't talk to you. And this is what's going on. And it wasn't she wouldn't talk to you. She cheated him on this entire thing. She cheated him. The pimp cheated him. I can't even pay for sex and come out of it with anything like that. It's just insane. And that, to me, it was just the whole story kind of teetered on that experience. So the only people that he can have faith in are non-sexual people, or people that are not prepared for sexual encounters, because the complexities and personal needs, kind of the stresses and tensions of that kind of a situation. So you stick with kids, And then I'm patting my head who's going to end up taking advantage for his own needs.
But what did
It
he
becomes
do to
obsessive
Phoebe?
to him. Yeah.
What did he do to Phoebe towards the end? He patted her on the bottom.
Oh, did he? I didn't notice that.
Or he,
No, he pinched
Or
her.
pinched
no,
her.
that was in the-
Pinched her.
He pinched.
Yeah.
He pinched her.
But then that wasn't considered.
that's
That
his
was
sister.
weird.
That was his sister.
Was it?
Yeah. I thought it was. I thought it was nothing. But
He sees her to the point of idolization.
Yeah, absolutely.
He will idolize this girl.
But just going back to what you're saying about his relationship with girls and with the prostitute, there's still also in his mind, you're not quite sure what's true and what isn't true.
Yeah.
Because after the thing with Mr. Antolini patting him, he said, I don't like this perving, it's happened to me 20
20
times.
times?
Now, that
Yeah.
Is it
cannot
really? That's what
possibly
gave it
be.
away for him.
You can imagine that a boy might have had it once, twice, something on, but 20 times.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
With boarding
that
school,
led
very,
me
very
to-
exactly.
but that led me to think what happened at home with his father or with his parents when I read that bit.
Yeah.
In what way?
Was
Oh, you think? Oh.
I don't know. Yeah, to me, yeah. I hear.
Maybe that's why he ended up being screwed up and depressed, and maybe authoritarian father. Perhaps he beat him. You don't know.
Or boarding school. I mean, he
Yeah,
went to so many
many
different
boarding
boarding
schools.
schools. Why
Yeah,
did he
it's
change it?
possible
It's
that,
possible boarding.
It's interesting, but the other thing I kept, as I was reading, focusing on his. I don't expect Holden Caulfield to have relationships with girls.
No.
I don't.
No.
See that he has, like, it was this girl. What was her name? Which his friend had
Jane.
taken out on a
Jane.
date. Yeah.
Jane.
Right, and you could see that this guy, the way he was going to treat this good girl that
Yeah.
wouldn't move her kings, and did she say that she wouldn't move her? Like, the one. wholesome connection that he had with a girl in his life, that this guy was going to be with this girl and not, it wasn't even that he was necessarily going to take advantage of her, although he talks about, whether you're going to have sex, not have sex. The fact that he wouldn't appreciate her, right? That was the way I read it anyway. Did she tell you about her kings? Like, did she recognize who this girl is? You know that she don't, you're objectify everybody else. And he couldn't get over that. He was consumed by that element in the story. That there should be this one woman. I know she's good. This girl is a girl that I actually spent time with. I did connect to, and that's what happens with a girl. You end up with the guy, that can't stop looking at himself in the mirror, and he has and he says he had a great build, and he did. Don't talk about all that. But to me, like throughout the entire story, he can't connect. He can't connect. And whether it's him that can't connect, or it's the way, the hypersensitivity that he has to phoniness on any level that disallows for him to be able to engage, So on the one level, it resonated very much. I want to go back to that question, if it's okay for a minute. Reading this, how much do we put up with? Maybe he's hypersensitive, and it's easy to Holden Caulfield often say he's hypersensitive to phoniness. How much phoniness do we put up with? I mean, we read it and laugh, and to a certain degree you say, well, there's a certain level that you have to put up with in order to be able to engage in society. I mean, we could also walk out buck naked, and say, well, it's phony to put clothes on because it's not what I am. It's like, to what degree do you clothe things, and accept that things are not always going to be stark, but at the same time, at what point do we sell out in terms of our lives and engaging with things and say, okay, everything's been caked on, I can't find anything real anymore. And to him, he couldn't find anything real anymore. The only thing real was his sister Phoebe. And it was the only one. And what else?
Going to the park.
The park, and what else?
This red hunting cap.
He has his red hunting cap. The Museum of Natural History.
Yeah.
He loves the Museum of Natural History. He wants taste, right? He feels like certain things should just be able to be always what they are. I read that, I felt like Olam Haba. In other words, that you want things to just be extant. It shouldn't be spoiled. But I felt that it was very interesting that this place he finds to be the earth itself. The soul of the earth, the Museum of Natural History. That's where I could go into it and feel it all.
Well, he spoke about the silence in the tomb when he was left.
Or when the two
other
little boys ran away.
Left him.
But what happens to that silence by the end of the book? It was very disheartening. What happens to silence? His last dialogue. Who remembers what this was silence? Who remembers the last dialogue? He starts fantasizing about what? Who remembers?
When he goes to a new school.
No.
About
going to a cabin and living
Oh,
alone,
as
and
a-
being
as a-
deaf
as a
and
mute.
mute.
Fantasizing.
Yeah.
Yes. People
Because
will
then he
leave you
doesn't
alone.
have to talk.
And he also married a so would
Definitely.
talk.
Yeah.
But they were going to teach their children to read.
Yes. So you read that and you feel like the development in this one night, essentially, or whatever it is that we're following him. His conclusion is, I have to shut myself completely off from the rest of the world. And what was the last line of the book? I mean, the last line, what does he say? What's the last line of the book? It's easier for you to get it than me.
Don't ever tell anybody anything.
If you do, you start missing everybody.
Yeah.
Get engaged. But it's change. It's what you said before, isn't it? That, as you said about the museum, that the museum is a counterexample to the principle that everything changes, nothing is constant. And his experience with the prostitute and his experience with Mr. Antolini were both microcosms of change. That he started off with a prostitute thinking, now I'm going to have a sexual experience. He didn't want it when it came, and she wouldn't have a conversation. And then Mr. Antolini, you could talk to and listen to, but then Mr. Antolini stroke his head and said, he didn't like it.
There was something at the beginning of the book where he was summoned by one of the teachers to be told he was going to be expelled. And the teacher said to him, "Life is a game. And life is a game, boy. Life is a game that one plays according to the rules." And he said, "Yes, sir, I know it is, and I know it." And then he goes, "Game my ass." But
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. I think it's a very important line. Is he taking the world too seriously? Is it untrue that the life is a game?
no.
Not seriously, morally. He's uncompromising in his morality, and that's what prevents him from being positive.
I mean, is there such a thing as just being too serious? I mean, his sense of humor, fine, but what I'm trying to, I'm so happy you brought that line out, because to a certain degree, isn't life a game? I mean, isn't it possible to take things too seriously?
Well, you certainly won't be popular in school if you take things too seriously.
That's for sure. Right. As a matter of fact, when you play, and people take the game too seriously, you can't play with them. You know, you just can't. You know those people that they can't just take the game too. You know, they just know. It's. I'm thinking about it. You know, it's kind of what Phoebe brought to him, because Phoebe is trying to get him to lighten up a little bit. You know, and he won't do it. He's seeing children's play in the rye as a dangerous thing. You know, they're going to end up falling off the
But
thing.
meanwhile, he's falling off the cliff. And
It
it's
seems
Phoebe
so.
who got him
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
You know, there's something we know about play. You know, that it's the one arena that we allow for uncertainty. And not only do we allow for uncertainty, we embrace uncertainty. We celebrate uncertainty in play. Right? Everywhere we really don't feel comfortable with uncertainty. You know, we can try and tell ourselves that we do, we train ourselves to get there, but in play, it's all about uncertainty. And we allow ourselves to do it, right? So there's this and it's doing it simply doing it. Right? There's no other. So first of all, in Torah it's very important. Play, we've lost it very much in Torah. Play is very much part of study in Torah. It's what we call in Talmud pilpul. Right? Pilpul was a play. Pilpul, right? It's all pilpul. Pilpul means we can play around with ideas, right? And not need to shoot the person across the table because they have a different idea than we do, or they do something a little bit differently, or they're a little bit quirky, or whatever the case is. You know, play is very much a part of scientific thought, of discovery, of openness, and so on. So it's almost that you have to play. There's this great line, and I'm paraphrasing it because it's more beautiful when you read it right, but, from Newton. And Newton says, you know, and this is the guy, by the way, I mean, he discovered optics. Practically everything we know about our physical universe, you know, our macro universe is discovered by Newton. And he said, with all that I've discovered, I still feel like a boy at play on the seashore, discovering a few shells, you know, with the entirety of reality lying undiscovered before. You know, but he sees himself essentially as an individual at play. And that's such I think that's a great line, because what he's saying over there is, game my ass, right? He refuses to accept any element of play in the world. He refuses to accept any element of play, you know. And, you know, he has to drink himself out of it. And what it ends up being is he can't play with anyone. He really, really, you know, has to isolate himself. That was very disheartening. You know, you read his dream is to be deaf and mute. You know, that he doesn't have to engage with anybody anymore. It's the only way that he'll be able to find solace. But there's another element, you know, that I want to share. I'll pass these pages around. You know, that we can look at and see how it goes.
Can you ever see him realistically as a grown man?
Yeah.
He'd have to grow up, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Do you think he'll ever get there?
I don't know. I worry.
I'm not sure he'd ever get there.
Unless he finds somebody he loves that can live with him and help him.
I think very much so. I mean, I think if this experience didn't overwhelm him, then why shouldn't he?
He'll get there.
Yeah.
And he'll have days where he'll go back to his.
When the book was written, I don't know whether whether autism and Asperger's syndrome were recognised, if they were recognised clinically, whether they were widely known. But of course, Holden Caulfield.
He's on the spectrum, isn't he?
He is. He's seriously autistic in a certain way, and it's
And terribly lonely. You know, that's what
Well,
got
that's
to be
part of
terribly,
autism.
terribly lonely.
But he stands up for the outsiders as well, though, right? Like he invites the awkward, the pimply friend
Yeah, the pimp,
to come along, and
Yes, that was particularly revolting.
he didn't like the fact that people closed their doors when they were in their
Yeah.
cliques, and
When he was telling his sister, he was talking about all the things at school.
Well, that's something that he says about the school. You know, they all stick to themselves and nobody ever.
Because he doesn't fit in. He can't find anywhere to fit in.
So here's the thing. So this is a perspective. You know, he's definitely got his flaw. But there's something that Torah talks about in many different ways. And the word that Hanifa. Hanifa is essentially flattery. You know, brown nosing, if you will. You know, doing things in a phony way in order to be for nothing other than personal. And so I thought I would share a little bit just in terms of how it works. You know, how the Torah treats it. And as I was going through it, it was interesting to me how it related to the book. So the first line is from Jeremiah. I forgot as I was making this. I was in such a rush. I forgot to tell you where the lines come from. So I'll tell you now where they come from. The first one is from Jeremiah, from Yirmiyah, and it says, "Shotetu bechutzot Yerushalayim." Look through all the streets of Jerusalem. Ur'u na ud'u, right? Look, check, no. Ubikshu berchovoteha, search through its squares. Im timtzeu ish, if you find a man. Im yesh oseh mishpat mevakesh emunah, if you find one person who does justice and is seeking faithfulness, I'll pardon her. This is God speaking, right? I'll pardon the city. Yeah.
This is Sodom and Amorah.
Nope.
And,
It's
and
Jerusalem.
Nineveh as well.
This is Jerusalem.
Yeah, but it's that concept, isn't it? Find one or find 40.
But what are we looking for over here? Justice and faithfulness. Right? We're looking for mishpat. If I can find one person who could be straight with me, if I can find one person that'll be faithful in terms of a relationship, I'll pardon the city. So, on a certain level, in Torah are meant to be rehabilitative. Cities in Torah are meant to be rehabilitative, right? We have this concept of an ir miklat, where if a person, I thought it was so interesting because you've got this murder basically, death in the book. This is what's going on in the city, his experience of life in terms of what things are. And in Torah, what happens if a person murders accidentally, the rehabilitation for that person is not prison. The rehabilitation for that person is to go to a particular city called an Ir Miklat. It's a city of refuge. And it's the city that is supposed to rehabilitate this person. This person is supposed to reintegrate into life, right? Because what is a city? A city is essentially a repository of culture, a repository of thought. It's a repository of history and so on. So it's meant to be that the experience of the city itself should be rehabilitative for the person, and that it has standards, and that it's self-correcting almost, and that in order for it to run properly, it has these standards you constantly have to test yourself against if you're going to live in the city and thrive, as opposed to living out, in the field, or living out, in the country, where you don't have context within which to bounce yourself off of.
But wasn't it partly to protect the murderer by sending him to somewhere else? Because he might have been very open to being attacked by the family of the person he'd murdered or something.
It was, but it wasn't just somewhere else. We could have sent him to prison and keep him safe, right? A white-collar prison, and keep him safe. But it's specifically a city that we sent him to, because we don't only want him to be safe from the Goel Hadam, right, the person's family who may be avenging the death. We want him to be rehabilitating in this setting, right? So it's specifically a city. Interestingly, Judy, people don't realize this all the time, not only does the court have to make sure that this person has a city of refuge, they also have to make sure that there is an avenger. You hear? Yes, they have to make sure that there is an avenger, because they have to make sure that justice is balanced on both sides. And if there's not an avenger, a natural avenger from the family, you have to appoint one. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, but here's the idea of what city is supposed to be. There's this constant concept throughout the Tanakh, throughout the Bible, of an Ir Tzedek, or Kiryan Emana, a city of justice, a city of faithfulness. So what's happening with Jerusalem, this is coming from Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the prophet at the time that Jerusalem was destroyed, and they were sent out into exile. And the issue of the city is not idol worship. The issue of the city, there's no more faithfulness in the city. People aren't just. We don't find justice. We don't find faithfulness. It's phony, right? But it goes forward. This next line is from the book of Bamidbar, from the book of Numbers, where the command is lo tahanifu et haaretz. So there's that word hanifa, and that word hanifa literally means pollute. Right? Don't pollute the land. Asher atem ba, that you are in. Ki hadam hu yahanif et haaretz. Right? All of a sudden talking about murder, because that's what it ends up getting to. Blood will pollute the land. V'la aretz lo yichupar ladam asher shupach ba. You will never be able to expunge or to atone for the blood that is spilt on the land. Ki'im bedam shofcho, except for the blood of the one who spilt it. Right. So the Torah is being very Old Testament over here, right? Testament, and but the more important element of the line is that it looks at the land, the earth, as being polluted. Right? It's talking about it from that perspective. It's not just talking about people not being faithful. It's saying there's something wrong with the earth, right? There's something missing in terms of your connection to the land. And in this capacity, exile happens. And exile always happens in cities. Right? We're never exiled into country territory. We're exiled into major cities. That's what we're always exiled to. So take a look quickly at the bottom of the page. This is Nachmanides, right? At the very bottom of the page. And what he brings is, he brings this line where it says, you know what's going to happen when you lose your faithfulness? The Bible says, Torah says to us, when you lose your faithfulness, when you lose your capacity to fight for justice, when you're not maintaining genuine of humanity, Zera Rav Totzi Asadeh Uma'at Te'esof. You will cast a huge amount of seed into your field, and you'll only reap very little. Kramim tita ve'avata, you will plant vineyards and you'll work. V'yayin lo tishteh, you'll never drink any wine. Zetim yulecha, you'll have olive trees. V'shemen lo tasuch, you will never anoint yourself with any oil. Kol artzecha priyad matecha yirash atzelatzal, all of your produce will be inherited by vermin, basically by insects. So that's the quote. Here Nachmanides says, what do we learn from these lines? He says, Kol hanufa. Talking about over and over again, the land will be michalif, it will be polluted. He says, what is hanifa? Look at this pasuk. He says, what hanifa is, asot hefech hanirah. It is the opposite of what you see, or what you expect. Right? So you're planting the thing, you'll never have any wine. You've got all these olives, you never get anything. Looks like everything is in place for this fantastic living, but in reality it's not happening. So what Nachmanides is saying, that the element of Hanifa is where things look a certain way on the outside, but they're not that way. The idea of Hanifa, the land has fallen into a situation where nothing any longer is as it seems. You can't trust anything that you engage in. It's what it looks a certain way to the eyes, but it's not at all what it is that you're seeing. So it's one thing to say, okay, I'm wearing clothes, I'm not walking out naked, right? Okay, this is our interface. There's a question of interface. But when the things that are presented have no relation to the reality that is happening, ultimately, a city breaks down, society breaks down, humanity breaks down. So to me, it was very interesting that this whole thing was happening in the city, in New York City, right? I mean, one of the major cities of the world. It's constantly moving, constantly bustling. The complexity of the city that he cannot find in this city any refuge for himself. He is not able to land anywhere. There's no way for him to be able to actually settle and connect. So some of it may be because he's hypersensitive, right? He's on the spectrum, whatever the case may be. But he has these constant glimpses that he puts out to us in terms of his humanity. Right? And as we see his humanity throughout the book, it keeps coming forward over and over and over again. And there's certain points where you say, Holden, if he just had somebody who would sit and talk with him, that one girl that kept her kings, in line, or whatever it was, somebody that would be able to connect and be able to connect with him on his level and be able to be just real and open and vulnerable with him. And it's funny because in every place he never finds somebody that's willing to be that vulnerable with him and that'll allow for him to be able to be that way. And so he can't land. The one place that he ends up being able, at least in his mind, to connect is not in the city but in the field, in the earth itself, in the rye. It's the one place where he feels like, I just want to be in the rye and I want to save the children from leaving that place. Because there they're rooted, there it's earth, there it's, as real as it gets, as real as it gets. And because, this line, the third line on the page, this is a line from Isaiah, from Yeshaya, right, where he says, Ashiva shofetai chebarishona. This is heralding a better time. I'll bring back your judges as they were originally. Oyo atzai kevatechela, your advisors, as in the beginning. Aharechen, when you have justice, when you have people that are fighting for reality, for things that are true, you will be called Yikarelach Ir HaTzedek. You'll be called the city of righteousness, Kiryah Ne'emana, the metropolis of faithfulness. So these are things that we're looking for, these are things that on a certain level, in reading Holden Caulfield's story, that's why I keep asking, does it resonate on any level? That we, to what degree do we put up with the phoniness? So he's an extreme, but that's what he is. He's a paradigm, right? This is this paradigmatic individual that in the end of the story feels that he cannot connect, that for some reason society has fallen apart around him, and the only thing that's still pristine is a sister, that hasn't gotten into the entire thing, and whatever have you here and there. And yes, we would look at him as crazy, because he won't integrate. He refuses. He remains noble. He remains noble. In the most severe sense of the word, he remains noble. Yeah. And to us, that level of nobility is perhaps a little bit insane, because we're saying, just get with the program. And there is a childishness to it, because as an adult, there's a question in Torah also. To what degree do you allow for change or a lack of complete, utter, brutal honesty in order to be able to integrate? And there is such a concept in Torah. But on a certain level, when you look at things as where justice is breaking down, faithfulness is breaking down, reality is breaking down, in its city, there's nowhere that you can land, on a on this kind of a level. We're saying, find me one faithful person and I'll save the city. To a certain degree, that's, what the story was, to me. And that the only place that he finds, is in the rye. The children playing in the rye, in the field, in the earth. It's fun.
To flip your question around, how much we put up with, you could also look at it that there are, we are all to some extent present different faces to the world around us. Is it not incumbent on us to not read everything at face value, which is actually what I think he's doing, and in that very shallow reading of people's behaviour, and he's not able to look beyond that and actually see himself in others, see the complexity that he clearly is self-aware of, but he can't project that onto anyone else. And actually, we're given, if you look at his behaviour from face value, you can quite easily characterise him with any of the other characters. He's not that much more special than any of the others. All we're given is the depths of his own inner dialogue. And so in a sense, if you're going back to your quote of, it's a game and we play by the rules, but in a sense those rules are just kind of the dressing. And if we all accept it, and then it's incumbent on us to look at someone, then it's a slightly more optimistic way of looking at it.
It comes out very strongly in the first scene where he's going to this teacher that's telling him that he's, cannot relate to an older person. I mean, it's like an alien to him, right? So there's definitely that on that level. But I wonder if it's so superficial, the way that he sees people. I wonder, I mean, is it so superficial? Does he not sense certain things that other people won't allow themselves to pick up on or to recognize? You know, like when he says, for example, he says grand, you know, it's such a phony word, you know. Isn't there a certain grain of truth to that? Or is it just, you know, get over yourself? And,
But there's another way to look at it.
yeah.
That, you know, we're all analysing his character very deeply.
Yeah. Maybe it's too deep.
Maybe I'm just thinking
Yeah.
that he's telling the story of what happened to him in the 3 days he's thrown out from school and he doesn't dare to go home. He's deeply depressed. And the thing about the catcher in the rye, where he's trying to catch all the other children, he's doing something which a lot of depressed people do, is they take the troubles of the whole world on themselves. And so he's not just depressed himself, he's trying to save everybody else.
Is there something wrong with that?
I don't think there is, but I'm just saying that maybe, you know, we're all putting things in his character, but maybe the overall thing is that he's just deeply depressed.
I mean, I thought about that to a degree. You know, maybe it's a very simple, but it's a very elaborate, you know, for Salinger to go through. I mean, we could be selling him, you know, we could be putting more into it than it is. We probably are. But, you know, when you read it, any one of us probably could have written that story. But when you go back and look at it, as I was going back and looking at it, you know, there's a lot of detail in this story that he puts in, you know, that's there. There's these subtle elements in it. I tend to think that there is a bit more depth, you know, first of all to Holden Caulfield, and second of all to
I'm
the...
not saying I didn't
No,
think there
no,
was
I know,
no depth,
yeah,
but
no.
I thought...
I'm saying in
It is-
general to the thing that we're putting out there. I wonder, you know, if it's so superficial the way that he's looking at it, that he sees certain things, you know, in people that most average people would rather not pay attention to. But the problem, I think, perhaps, is that his way of dealing with it is very superficial. Right? He'll recognize deep things, but he won't go to depths to be able to deal with what those, you know, things are. To him, it's a matter of saving kids from running off. You know, okay, you know, kids are going to grow up. This is not Peter Pan, right? I mean, kids are going to grow up, you know, with him. So this idealized idea, that probably to me was the most lost Holden. The whole Catcher in the Rye dream was where I lost it. You know, it was like, you know, really, you're gonna save the kids and stick them. To me, that was almost manipulative and abusive. You know, you're gonna let the kid. You're gonna protect the kids from ever growing up, and who knows where, you know, what they're gonna end up being able to do. So that ends up, you know, deals with it are probably the problematic and the neurotic or whatever elements that there are. But his eye, you know, that vision that he has, that's something that you know, kind of resonates. You know, that kind of resonates, which, you know, on what level can we see it and address it and deal with it without having to feel like, you know, just got to put everything behind glass in the museum, plug them into the field or whatever the case is. But in any case,
But Salinger gave the book that title.
yes, no,
That's
I know.
what he picked out.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, that's
what he
Holden.
has to
That's
do.
what Holden's holding on to. You know, he's Holden. He holds to everything. But the idea is, you know, these are things that we don't often discuss. The things that he was picking up, we don't often discuss. We don't. Society, we like our veneers very, very much.
You know, this book was written in 1945.
Yeah.
It just war.
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, I mean, 60s came out, you know, not soon after.
There are people like that now.
Well, that's an interesting thing, you know, today's, I guess we have to wrap up, but, you know, today's child, that's a question that people are asking about, you know, in terms of, does this relate to the child today, and so on and so forth.
Some.
It's perhaps that it does to some, but it's possible, you know, that we're living in a world in where we've stripped things down so much, you know, that we're not afraid anymore. I think, you know, the banned thing, the book was banned, you know, and I wonder, you know, why was the book banned? Was it because of the language? Or were we afraid of his eye? In other words, we're afraid of his vision of a you know, I don't know. I would tend to think that probably the underlying reason is that, I don't know. And that's why I'm saying, you know, today, this book would not be bad. I mean, you know, we wish this is what they were reading today. It's like we've stripped everything down, you know, to the degree that either everybody's depressed like Holden or...
There is one, it seems to me, very fundamental limitation to the book, which is that the avoidance of phoniness is the supreme moral good in its various manifestations. But that's a very simple form of morality, because real morality, and really serious morality, is about conflicts of good. And, I mean, to invent a slightly absurd illustration, it may be that some of the people that he regarded as phonies, some of his schoolmates, for example, perhaps they were trying to satisfy the heartfelt aspirations of a parent who wanted them to be in the team, or who wanted them to dress nicely, and maybe it's not as simple as just you mustn't be phony. It's more complicated than that, but still it's
absolutely. And that's an important element that Torah puts forth as well, because, you know, we say honesty is the best policy. Torah doesn't necessarily hold from that policy. And it doesn't necessarily look at honesty and truth as one and the same. Truth is more complex than honesty. You know, you don't always want to tell people exactly as it is. It could be very destructive to do that, you know. So that's a question of what's phony and what's complex and conflicted, you know. So, good point to end on. Thank you, everybody. I guess now to end this. Figure out how you're going to do it.